Did you
I
get a
pressed OK.
prompt?
Yeah, I pressed OK.
Okay. All right. All right. So here we go. So I want to welcome the students who've joined for tonight's discussion. Katie Macalintal. Ooh, boy, did it again.
It's OK.
Class 24, software engineer at Microsoft. She's going to talk about a number of different things, but in particular, she's going to emphasize her discussion around the search process around internships. What are some things you want to keep in mind? Maybe some things you want to do, and then similarly, stepping into the full-time search process. Okay, so that's where we'll ask her to focus, although we'll talk about a number of other things tonight as well. Katie graduated from Middlebury in 24 with a major in computer science. She was an active member, a leader in the Women in Computer Science group, and she served as a course assistant in the computer science department. Her first internship was with Team for Tech, which is a nonprofit dedicated to creating inclusion and opportunities in tech through education. The following summer, she began her career at Microsoft as an Explore intern, which is a software engineering and program management opportunity designed for first years and sophomores. She subsequently returned following summer as a software engineering intern, and she's now full-time as a software engineer on the Azure AI search team. Welcome, Katie. So Katie, why don't we start with tell us what your role is at Microsoft. Kind of what's the day-to-day like? What's the focus? What does the role do? What are some of the skills, tools that you find yourself using?
hmm Yeah, so as you mentioned, my title is software engineer and I'm entry level. So um, my day-to-day as a software engineer kind of looks like we have this like sort of daily occurrence of these meetings where we just talk about progress on tasks that have been assigned to us. And that's called like stand up or scrum, depending on where you are. And it's basically like you just give a mini update. But as the extent of meetings I have on a day-to-day basis, that's the only one that's like really relevant and persistent. It's like 30 minutes a day. Then one-on-one with managers every week or like my skip manager, so manager of my manager every quarter. But my day-to-day basically looks like just trying to tackle the items within our backlog. So the tasks that are assigned to me. And those tasks really depend on the team that you're on. And so like on my team, I'm under our performance pillar. So a lot of it is like, running some performance tasks or improving like the number of things that are running in parallel or things along the lines of that, of just like improving the service in that way. So it is basically like as a new person on the team, they were giving me a lot of bug fixes to do just to get familiar with a lot of different parts of the product. And a lot of smaller tasks before really putting me on like some big feature. And so that's kind of like the work as under like my team, but we also like have to handle live site issues. So like issues that come up within the service. So if the service went down in the middle of the night, like you get a call, like you're the one, like there's this rotational schedule for people to handle issues like that. And then like if bugs come up from that, that gets added to the backlog and handling cases from there just to make sure that our product is running the way we want and customers are interacting and getting what we promise. So it is like a mix of feature or like whatever area you're kind of assigned, like working that way, or like just making sure that the service is up and running the way we want and expect it to run. In terms of like tools and stuff that I use, um, for like adding code and like maintaining and making sure that it's all like getting integrated in a safe way, we use everything that's like Azure or Microsoft owned. So we use like Azure DevOps and like Azure DevOps boards. Some people use like Jira, like not at Microsoft, but outside of Microsoft, they use Jira or things along the lines of that. That serves a similar function. It's just a different platform. Also Git for like Git so that you have the continuous integration stuff. And then we have to deal a lot with like telemetry and logs. So being able to go through the past of like, oh, what's happening in the service, and you do that through telemetry and logs, and knowing how to use a query language to some degree to like filter through all of that information. And then also just for like making sure that your service is up to date. It's like making sure that you have monitors to make sure that there are things that are, you know, checking whether things are healthy and whatever. And in terms of like practices, I mentioned Scrum and like Agile. So like that's the way, that's like kind of the formal term to say that the way like tasks are organized and teams are organized, and you determine like how and when people pick up tasks, like that's the sort of like format and flow that we follow. And then like, you know, like when coding, we are allowed to use chatbots like ChatGPT or Copilot or things along the lines of that. It's just like, you know, you have to be mindful about what you add to it, because if you're putting in sensitive information, that's like a big red flag. So like those tools are still at our disposal as well. But since my product's also like served in the cloud, I use the Azure portal a lot and like playing with resources in there. And so, yeah, but that's basically what my day-to-day looks like. It's a lot of just working on the tasks that have been assigned to me, and then using a bunch of the different tools that I've mentioned. So the past, I think I just hit my 6-month mark. So a lot of it has been like learning how to use all of those tools and how they are relevant to our service. But
Okay.
yeah.
Well, so let's freeze there for a second and talk to us a little bit about what prepared you for what you're doing at Middlebury versus the things that you kind of had to learn over the last 6 months to do what you're doing.
Yeah, so I think like in terms of what prepared me, I think those skills of like being able to ask questions and not be afraid to reach out for help, being able to like frame what you know like into words and then what you need help with. I think that's like the biggest skill that has been applicable in the past 6 months, is like also gauging like, okay, I've tried these things, but I'm still stuck. I need to reach out for help. So like those kind of smaller skills of like communication and like honesty and integrity of like admitting that you don't know how something works, so you still need a little help. So I think like that's been a big thing. And then in terms of things that like I didn't know beforehand, I don't know if I'm giving feedback, but I hear like
No,
feedback.
no, go ahead. Go ahead.
Okay. No, but I don't think like you like anywhere you go, you'll know every technical thing that you'd need to work on. So I feel like also like I didn't know how to use query languages super efficiently or things like that. Like that's something that you're just gonna have to learn on the job by doing. Because you can't like learn every single tool of the stack that you're gonna use, because it's always changing. And if you move again, then it's like you're gonna have to relearn it all on the job again. So I think like in that way though, understanding how you learn and the best way that you learn is, I think, like one of the key things that can help you like ramp up to the job as or a job as quickly as possible. Like if you know that you learn through conversations and like setting up meetings with people on your team, or like if you know that you learn through doing then asking for tasks, that you know might give you more opportunity to like practice that stuff. So I think also just being aware of your learning style is like something that, you know, can be a differentiator in how quickly you're able to adapt to like what you have to do for a team.
Okay. So let's take the world that you're working in, and we'll bifurcate it between technical and non-technical skills. So you've talked a bit about the tools that you've used and the need to be able to obviously learn new tools as you're working in whatever organization you're in. What would you say, kind of the balance is between technical and non-technical? You mentioned communication, obviously, as an example, to actually be effective in what you're doing.
I think like I think in the first 6 months, I'm like, mind you, this is like the first 6 months, so
Yep.
that's
Yep.
like the perspective that I'm giving. But I think in terms of tech, I think like in terms of the split, in order to be productive, I think in the beginning, it really does heavily depend on like your way to communicate and like advocate for yourself if you feel like this isn't being like effective, or like you need more help in that way. But once you hit like a certain point, then I think the technical knowledge is where it would allow you to be more like productive, because you don't need you have more context. So like your need to communicate with someone else for help won't probably be as often is what I'm like, anticipating. But I think
Mhm.
in the beginning, I think like that communication skill is super important when reaching out for help because sometimes you're given tasks that have zero context and you're gonna have to like clarify what the three-worded title on the task with no description really means. So I think like in the beginning, it does feel really daunting, like not really knowing a lot of the technical relevant information, but leaning back on those communication skills is super important for being able to get over bumps and not be blocked for too long. So,
Okay, cool. Um, so tell us a little bit about the other roles. You got functional roles, software engineering roles. Tell us about the other roles, functional roles that you may be dealing with as you do what you do.
yeah. So also like I am at the lower end of things. So my like the roles that I really interact with on a daily are my peer engineers, so the other people on my team, and my manager, so the engineering manager, and then occasionally our PM that, kind of cross coordinates through multiple teams and multiple outlets and is managing a lot of things that we don't see that's like kind of abstracted away from us. There are definitely more, roles that you'd have to interact with, but as like an entry level person, I don't really interact with them that much. It's mainly other engineers either on my team or my sister team and my engineering manager. I know sometimes that people also communicate. I'm like on the back end. So when we're
Mhm.
trying to create a feature like from front end to back end, we have the back end like implemented. There are people that have to communicate more with the engineers on the front end team. And so I haven't gotten to that stage yet, but I do know that that is like a form of communication that does get, bridged there. But as currently where I am in my role right now, it's mainly like my engineering manager and then my engineering peers on my team or sister teams that I mainly interact with.
Okay.
Yeah.
We're gonna in a moment we're gonna talk about kind of the search process. Some
Hmm.
things that you went through and how you approached it. But before we do that, I'm just curious: is there anything that you wish you had done while you're at mid that would have, from your perspective, your vantage point now, may have made a difference? So anything that you wish you had done that you didn't do?
I feel like I don't know if it's like something I wish I did, but something that I wish I kind of spent more time looking at. Like, I think if I had known how a cloud was structured and like all of the things that kind of were taken into consideration in like cloud computing or like creating a cloud and how it works and how it like I think that would have saved me a lot of time in the beginning just because since my product is built on top like served through the cloud like understanding the architecture and the features that come with the cloud I think are important and they trickle down as
Mhm.
you go down and think about how services are built on top of it. So it's not something that I think I could have done in Middlebury, but it's something that I wish I had known a little bit more before starting in the industry. Or like that might not be applicable to everyone though, because it's very much company and team dependent and where you end up getting placed. But I do think that like, you know, having more awareness there and then also just like kind of staying on top of like what's happening in the tech realm or like the industry that you're interested in going into like I think that could add a little bit of like perspective to like yourself of like if you were in an interview and the company asks like you can like have like this kind of sort of back and forth conversation on like this part of the industry that you're genuinely interested in, and then you have an interview with them and you can easily hold a conversation about something that's relevant in the world at that point in time. So I think like while in college I think like spending like 10 to 15 minutes every day just like skimming headlines of what's happening in tech, because you never know when like a conversation might strike up in an interview or not even in an interview, like somewhere else,
Yeah.
like at a conference or something. Yeah.
Yeah.
So
So having some context
yeah.
um, around the particular dimensions of the organization, the product, the business, if I can use that word,
Hmm.
um, would be important. I agree with you. I know in my past, interviewing candidates for Deloitte Consulting, I was always much more impressed with candidates that knew about the business of
Hmm.
consulting and were able to tell me more why Deloitte as opposed to, pick whatever other consulting firm. It just communicated that they were motivated, that they understood what they were getting into in terms of the business. So I agree with you.
Hmm.
Good. Okay, so let's transition and talk a little bit about the process. So tell us a little bit about your process for finding internships, the internship experiences. What were you thinking? What do you think was effective, both in terms of the search process itself, but then also in your story to be able to actually secure those internships? Take it away.
Yes. So I think in terms of the search itself, it was kind of a long journey for me. It kind of started early though too, because I feel like the whole like getting an internship thing was on my radar pretty early. I don't think like first years typically think about getting an internship for the next summer or even that summer, but that was on my radar as a first year. And so I think like that was when I first started like internship like hunting. And so the way that I did it that first like go around for the summer where I actually landed an internship with like Team for Tech. And I think the Team for Tech
Mhm.
internship was like very foundational to a reason why I ended up landing it at as an Explorer intern at Microsoft. But the way I found that one was basically through like seeing and hearing about what other kids at Middlebury did. Um, that because like I actually had like a mentor through Wix that told me that she did Team for Tech and she's like, here's the application, like here's when it comes out, like, and I was like, oh, okay, you did it, like I might as well give it a shot, like, you talk about it in a high regard and there's no chance that like I apply, worst that happens is that I don't get it. So that's how I kind of first sourced my internships. My first year was basically word of mouth from other peers at Middlebury and also maybe like looking at other people's maybe LinkedIn profiles and looking at what they had done in the past as a Middlebury student that might have so that's kind of how I first sourced it out in the early stages. And yeah, I was able to land like my Team for Tech thing there. But as I continued going, I did attend a few conferences, and I think that's another way to land or at least get exposed to opportunities in tech. So I was able to attend Grace Hopper once virtually. It was like the one time that it was like fully virtual. Now it's like a different beast with in person. And there's challenges
Mhm.
there that I don't think I faced when I attended and participated in that conference. And there was also Tapia too, was another one that I attended. And I think like that was another place where you actually got to talk with recruiters face to face and like have like, talk about your experiences and stuff. You don't have that much time to really sell yourself, but I think it's still like another opportunity to talk with recruiters and figure out like what internship opportunities there are out there, especially just like for students. Like those conferences are made for students, so they already know like what they're trying to do there. So that was another way that I like found internships. And then there's also a handful of organizations out there for people that might be underrepresented in tech that have their own like mini conferences or outlets of, they have their own sponsors and you can find things through that way too. Um, but beyond that too, I know that some people look at there's always Handshake and LinkedIn. I think that sometimes those are super overwhelming with the number of opportunities that they post on there, but I know those are resources. And sometimes though, there's also like GitHub pages where people create a whole list of companies that they anticipate will have internship applications and then post the link there to apply. The thing with that though is that it's public and thousands of people are following it. So by the time the
Yeah.
link gets there, there's already so many people that have filled out the application that it's kind of like a shoot in the dark a little bit. But I mean, like
Mhm.
if you're trying to find something to apply to, there's sometimes like aggregated lists of like internships that are like currently recruiting or have active applications. So those are like some of the outlets that I like thought of like using through finding internships. There's so many different ways. It's like by word of mouth, by looking at what other people at your college did. I kind of like the looking at other people that at your college did, because you have someone that you can talk to about the process, and you can ask them about their experience. And, there might be a good chance that if they left a good impression on the company and they see another person from the same college, like, I feel like there's so many things to take advantage of there, that's kind of the one that I kind of like the most. But then there's also so then, yeah, it's like looking at what other people have done, attending conferences or taking advantage of other programs if you're if you like identify as someone that's underrepresented in tech. And then, the regular job posting boards, or, aggregated lists that people have posted online with updates on if
Yeah.
you're, yeah.
I hadn't thought about snooping on others on LinkedIn. That's an interesting one.
I think that's like something that I don't know. I sometimes I'll look up like, oh, this person mentioned they did this. Let me look at like if what other things they did there.
No,
But
I like it. I think
yeah.
it's an interesting idea. Sure, why not? Right?
Yeah.
So as you reflect back on going through the process,
Hmm.
what do you think made a difference for you? And
Yeah.
keeping in mind that for most internships, yeah, there are a ton of other people applying. So
Hmm.
how do you stand out? What worked for you?
I think like I'll kind of talk about like my experience kind of applying and landing with the Explore internship, because I feel like that's the most formal kind of application process that I went through, and the most
Mhm.
daunting as well. So I think in terms of that kind of experience, I really did try to focus. I was a sophomore. I'll give that context. I was starting, it was like summer going into my sophomore year. So I really didn't have that strong of a resume. I literally only had like data structures, my only like computer science course. And I didn't feel comfortable with the resume that I would have submitted at the end of, my sophomore semester. And so then but I really wanted to apply for internships that fall because
Mhm.
I wanted something sophomore summer going into junior summer, just to gain experience, maybe make money. But so I think like in like not feeling comfortable in my resume, I kind of spent part of the spring and part of like that summer, like thinking about like how can I like make my resume look a little bit better. So I I did a project that summer. It wasn't the best project that, someone could create. It was some game in Java with UI, but and it was like super simple. It wasn't like super simple, but it wasn't the most complex thing. But I think, saying that I spent time outside of the classroom on a project
Mhm.
that, when I sent in my application, it wasn't done yet, but by the time I did my interview, I was able to talk about like the finished application that I had. I think like that I think like helped me a little bit stand out on that application thing. And then also the fact that I was participating in things that were still computer science related. Like I signed up to go to like a conference that was led by Liberty Mutual. It was so random. It was just a tech conference for women in like for Liberty Mutual that summer too. So I was able to put that down. And like just thinking about like how I can build my resume, but also because I did like feel very interested in tech, and I wanted to make sure that I was doing things actively to make myself look also like a more qualified candidate for something,
Mhm.
because I was also genuinely interested in it. It wasn't just like, oh, I need a bunch of things on my that was part of it. But
Right.
at the same time, I actually wanted to like keep learning and figure out like how do I get there. So I think it was like taking advantage of opportunities outside of the classroom and being able to put that on there. And then also just um like working on projects on the side too. And I think doing that. But also like in that process, I was able to talk with at least one other person that had gone through the explore process. And I think that helped me a lot with like figuring out like you know what am I like what to expect, like what made them stand out in their mind through it, and get advice on like this is what they're looking for as like an explore intern, like try to focus on these
Mhm.
points in your interview. And so I think like being able to talk to someone who had gone through the process, I think gave me a leg up in how to frame it in my mind. And I think also just like throughout that process of applying for the Microsoft Explore internship, I was also still applying to other places and taking their applications just as seriously. and their interviews just as seriously. And I think if I hadn't been applying to other ones, I wouldn't have felt as prepared for the Microsoft
Mhm.
interview, like the final round, because I was doing like those higher interviews, those virtual ones, and like, just having to get back into the interviewing brain of like, oh, what's the STAR method? What are qualities that I like look for, and like what are qualities that I consider my strengths and stuff. So I think like also just like practicing interviewing throughout that process allowed me to get more comfortable and like execute in a way that I was happy with when like doing that final round with the Microsoft Explore one. So I think like just taking advantage of what's around you, like trying to sign up for a conference that might not look the best, like it might be super random, but like you might learn a lot from it and like make connections and stuff like that, or like starting a project on the side and taking like every interview or application like you apply to, like actually genuinely trying to get it, because
Mhm.
I think
That
like
sounds like a good idea.
some people like mass apply though, and they don't, they
Uh,
so I think
uh,
like taking those applications sort of seriously. But I do understand that there's burnout with it too at the same time. So I
yeah,
think that's
yeah.
something to be mindful of.
Well, hopefully those students who are listening in understand, my philosophy on the search process, which is not, you know, quantity, mm-mm, quality. And a lot of what you've described are things that raise the quality of your application. And so that's where you want to spend your cycles, is on getting the quality up. So going to a conference, doing the project that you described, talking to people in the roles that you're interested in or in the organizations that you're interested in, I think is the way to go, as opposed to just firing off a bunch of applications, which generally leads to disappointment,
Mhm.
because you don't hear anything. Um, okay. Any general advice you might have as students are preparing themselves for internships or full time?
As they prepare themselves, or like for the process of it, or
Well, yes, the process is really what I'm focused on. Any advice that you might have?
I think like in terms of advice there, if you're looking for like resources of practicing like technical skills, I think because what's annoying about the SWE process is the technical interviews. Like that's not something
Mm-hmm.
that you can avoid. So I think like for that part of the application, I think it's important to, just grind out the LEET code. And there's a bunch of resources out there to do that part of it. But yeah, like you said, I think like talking with people is like so important throughout the process of like people that have gone through it, or like even getting advice on your resume of, is this quality, or like what things do you think I should change the wording of? Um, but I'm not sure if this is like fully answering your question though. But yeah, I think like in terms of sources for like technical prep, I feel like that's just something that you have to kind of, bang out and then do. But yeah, I think like in terms of the process, I think connecting and talking with a bunch of people about it, or getting advice throughout it, and maybe doing a mock interview before you
Mm-hmm.
have to, do the real thing is really important as well.
Okay. All right. Well, let's transition into Q&A. So I'm going to invite participants to turn on their cameras. And if you want to ask a question, just raise your hand and we'll go for it. So you would turn on your cameras, that'd be super. There's one. Do you have a question?
Um, sure, yeah. Katie, I'm wondering, uh, said that you did the Explore intern and then another internship afterwards. Like, what's the sort of, how do you feel like after doing it once compared to the second time to like what you do now? Like, do you think it's the sort of, you got the gist of it, it's the same thing, or are you like learning every time going into something new?
Yeah, I think like, yeah, I'm kind of internalizing that question of like, how did the internship differ from like full-time work? So I think it definitely depends on the teams that you were on beforehand and the work that they assigned to you as an intern. So I think like, yes, I'd interned at this company twice beforehand, but they were all very different summers and opportunities. Like my first summer as like an Explore intern, you're in a pod of like three other people and you're working on one project. And then the next summer, you're basically the workload expected of you is the work that you had done on the project with two other people. So like you already learn a lot from like that first internship of like, this is how the tech world works. Like you're able to like kind of mellow into it in that way. At least I was. And like in terms of like technical information that they like the technical knowledge that I needed there, I think I just got like the gist of like the tools used in the industry and the workflows that they do there. So that was the biggest learning there. And then the second internship that I did, the learning was a little bit different there just because the project was different, but I was on the same team. So I knew like, you know, the cadences and meetings and like the tools that they use. But the project was a little bit simpler. So I feel like that was like learning in a little different way. I did something with like GPT plugins and like prompt engineering and stuff like that. And so the learning was more so on that realm. But even as a full-time, I got team switched again. I got team switched. So now I'm like in a totally different realm, you know, like it's a different manager. Like no one from my past team is on the team that I'm on now. So it's a very different like experience and environment, and you are given more responsibility as a full-time engineer. I think like on my teams as an intern, I was kind of like in a protected kind of like project of not fully maybe touching like prod code, like all production code, like all the time. Um, but now it's like you're actually part of the team and they expect you to like touch prod code and contribute in that way. So it's a lot of there's a lot of different learnings that's happened at each stage. And I think it all builds off of each other, but at the same time, it definitely depends on like the teams that you get placed on from, you know, one summer to the next to then full time. And, you know, there's a lot of factors in it. So, but I think no matter like where you go, there's always going to be things to learn, especially in tech when things are changing so quickly. So yeah, hopefully that answers the question, but if it doesn't, let me know. Yeah.
Other questions? Go ahead, Marley.
Hey, thanks, Katie, for everything that you shared today. When you were talking about finding internships, you mentioned that there are resources for people who are underrepresented in the tech community. And I was wondering if you had any like any names of like particular organizations or advice about that.
Yeah. So some of the orgs that like I'm aware of and I've actually like signed up to be a part of, there's Girls Who Code. That's a really big one. I think that one's like a little bit too big to really be super helpful. The one that I found more helpful was one called not super helpful. I think it is still helpful. It's just a little overwhelming how many people are a part of it. One that I found like more helpful was one called Rewriting the Code. And that's also for like people who identify either as like women or maybe I think also non-binary can like be a part of, and they have like a conference every maybe summer or something where they have like sponsors and stuff come in, and so you can talk with them. It's virtual. So and they have a lot of different resources too. Then there's a few others. There's one called Code Path. I don't know if I think they do try to target people that are underrepresented in tech. And they offer courses that you can like apply to take. They have like interview prep courses or like making a mobile app course. This is all I also like haven't looked at them since like maybe 2 summers ago, so I'm not sure how much of it has changed since then. And then I know of other people that have participated in something called Code 2040. And I think that's for like either like Black or Latinx people in tech. And so I think that's another resource out there. There's definitely so many more though that you can probably find online, but those are ones that I've like used or at least heard of in the past for people that are underrepresented. I'm wondering if there's any other that I'm forgetting, but those are the ones that come to mind immediately. So yeah.
Other thoughts, questions? Go ahead, Alex.
Hi, Katie. So thank you so much for your time. It's been really helpful so far. So I'm curious about the standards that they have for going into the application and the interview. So do they care most about your grades or about the projects you've done or about your performance on the lead code or
Mhm.
GitHub contributions? So what do they care most about?
Yeah, I want to preface that I also think it depends on like the company and the things that you're applying to more specifically. Like I think, you know, certain people at certain companies look for different things, but I think that what I've heard, like I'm not doing the recruitment process or anything like reviewing resumes or things like that, and so I don't have that insight there, but I feel like GPA, from what I hear, is not that important. I think people care more so about like the projects that you contribute to and the way that you perform in an interview. Most of the time, they're looking for like, you know, how do you think about something and, you know, how are you able to like sometimes you're going to be given a problem that you really don't know how to solve, but you still have to like tackle it. And so it's about like how do you think and like verbalizing your thought process. And there are like frameworks to help you think think about the way that you should handle like technical like a elite code problem. I don't remember them off the top of my head, but I know they're out there to help like frame your mind before you actually start like coding an answer to help you get through that. But in terms of the things that they might care most about, I wouldn't stress too much on GPA unless the application you have says you must have a 3.5 or higher GPA. But I do think they care more about like what tools can you use and you know, what projects and experiences do you have? And then through the process, I think it's all about like how you articulate the things that you've gathered from those experiences. But definitely like for context on like the application that you're looking at, like actually like read the thing and if they're like, oh, we're looking for this skill, make sure it's like if you have it, make sure it's listed and put it a little earlier on in your resume, like kind of tweak your resume to the thing that you're sending it to, because if you really want it, I think like tailoring your resume to the description of the job posting will really be what helps you stand out through the process. You know, there are people mass applying places, not reading it at all. So, you know, doing the little tweaking here and there, I think can help you stand out a little too.
And just a word of caution to you all in terms of using any AI type tools to make your resume look like the job description. It's okay to get that started, but you better be able to back it up, because the first time they scratch at it and they find a hole, you're done, right? So just be very careful when you use those tools to make sure it's true what you're saying.
Yeah, you don't want to lie or anything like
No,
that. Yeah.
misrepresentation is not a good thing.
Yeah. Like only put the things that actually you qualify, like you feel comfortable that you see as a skill of yours, not copy paste the description and put it on your resume. So
Well, and Katie, you've already mentioned that over the first 6 months, you've had to learn new tools, right? And so it's more about demonstrating that you have learned some tools, but also your ability to learn new tools is kind of an important thing to be able to demonstrate. Other questions? I'm curious, Katie, if for you to just talk a little bit about the transition from being a student to being in the working world, the professional environment. What sort of things come to mind as far as anything surprise you or not surprise you?
I think there are definitely factors in it that can like depend, like deciding where you live, who's your support system at where you live, and then also just like team things become dependent. But I think like in terms of things, I wouldn't say they surprise me, but they are very different from learning in a classroom setting. Like I feel like at Middlebury, there's so much support for students if they don't understand something. Like you have office hours, you have student helpers, and you have like so many outlets of other people to talk to on things that you don't understand. And then when you go into the industry, sometimes all the knowledge is dependent on one person that might have left the team like 2 weeks before you got there, or knowledge is sometimes undocumented, so it can be hard to find and hard to transfer in that way. So I think that's something that differs in terms of like learning at Middlebury versus learning in the real world of like, not real world, but in the corporate world maybe, of like, sometimes there's undocumented information that you wish you had, or sometimes that information was all on one person that's no longer there, and at Middlebury it's so different because there's always people to turn to. Oh, you kind of know that there will be an incorrect solution or answer. Sometimes in the tech world, you got to run some experiments and you don't know what the outcome will be, or like you got to try it different ways. Like there's no one actually knows the right answer to something that you're working on, and that's why they've asked you to work on it. So I think that's also a big difference. But yeah, I think those are, I don't know if they're surprising, but they are just differences that I noticed from, classroom at Middlebury versus job in corporate. Yeah.
And how do you feel? I know this is a tough question to answer, but I'm going to ask it anyway. How do you feel about your coworkers
My
in terms
coworkers?
of, their level of preparation?
Well, I think also like
I mean,
they
and what I'm really looking for here, Katie, is do you feel like you belong as far as, you're up to the task, or do
oh
you feel
yeah.
like you're having to fake it?
I feel like there will always be like more things to know before you can confidently say that like not know everything, but
Yeah.
like I think there's still a lot for me to learn. But I think like the way that my team is structured and the kind of culture that they have on it allows me to admit that I might not know something, and they're very supportive in the way of um like asking questions. They don't make me feel like the question was dumb, and like I see like senior engineers asking like, oh, what's that term mean, or like, oh, I don't
Yeah.
understand what you're saying. So that's when I'm like, okay, actually, like maybe we all like there's always going to be stuff that we don't know, and like things that we you know shouldn't be afraid to admit that we don't know. And so I think like seeing the way that people on my team aren't afraid to ask dumb questions, or aren't afraid to ask questions about like simple terms and things like that, I think leaves me with comfort that like it like you're never going to know everything. And I think
Yeah.
just like being able to ask and admit that you don't know something is
Yeah.
is important.
I know sometimes students feel like they, the imposter syndrome side of things, like, gee, I'm not good enough. And I think I would hope that you all would recognize that you are good enough, right?
Yeah.
So don't ever fear that when you're going into a new situation.
Yeah.
Other thoughts or questions before we wrap things up? Go ahead, Marley.
Yeah, so I wanted to ask you, Katie, why you decided to go into big tech as opposed to like a startup or working as a software engineer for a company in a different industry, and if you are like happy in the industry that you're in now, or if you think maybe there would be like at least from what I've heard about some big tech companies, like maybe sort of like a, I don't know if there's like a like very competitive culture to that, or what's the difference between all those different industries and stuff.
Yeah, so I can't like speak about experience in different industries just because like my experiences basically lie within big tech, but I think like the reason why I think like I still admire really greatly like startups, and I think sometimes I'm like, should I have gone down like the startup lane? But one of the reasons why I think like big tech kind of fell into my lap, and I was like, when is the opportunity? Like when I got the offer, I was kind of like, when would the opportunity come again? You know, like the application processes as you get to higher levels, like as a entry level new grad is definitely different than my internship interview process as, you know, a sophomore in college, because the bar is a little, it has to be lower given the context that, you know, a sophomore has in college. So I was like, I just don't know when my next opportunity in big tech would be. So I kind of just took it. And also like, I had done a few, like, I had talked to a few alums and I was trying to figure out like, do I want to do like startup? Do I want to focus on smaller companies, or do I want to go to one that's already established? And for me, like, there is a factor of financial stability, and going into startup where maybe more of your income is dependent on like a stock promise and the performance of the company there. Like I felt like when I was applying and like making decisions, like I don't know if I like need financial stability to an extent, like as someone that has student debt. Like it's a reality that I have, like you have to face if that's something that you have. So that was another reason why I kind of chose like an established company. I was like, it feels like a safer choice right now, even though, you know, there's still, you know, waves of layoffs. Like, that's something that unfortunately is a reality at the same time. But when I was making the decision, it just seemed like a safer choice. But also like there, for me, I'm like, there, I feel like I can use these years as building knowledge and building connections with other people in the industry. And then, you know, after that, if I do want to go into like a startup world, I'll have some at least knowledge and maybe other things that I can contribute there. So it's never like really too late to switch between either or, honestly. Like your first job doesn't have to be the job that you hold forever. Like I think that's super important. Or like the first internship or opportunity you get doesn't have to be the one that you stick with forever. Like, you know, it's all about like learning about, if you liked the experience, then you can go to something else. But to answer your question, I chose big tech because it happened to fall into my lap, and I wasn't sure when the opportunity would come again. And then I also like felt like financially it was kind of the decision I needed to lean more into. So
It's a great question, Marley, and I think there are a number of factors that each individual needs to kind of evaluate, because you'll all have different weightings on those factors when you're kind of evaluating. You know, do I go left or do I go right in terms of opportunity? Things like resources that can be deployed to help me learn and develop. Are there more people that I can learn from and develop under? You know, versus wanting to experience a number of different roles instead of a singular role. You know, startup tends to be more multiple role, multiple hat, but it has fewer resources. Where that startup is in the funding process, right? And these days, a number of those startups are running out of runway in terms of their funding. And so that matters. You just need to know those sorts of things you know, when you're making the decisions. I think in all cases, I would say if you can understand the people that you'll be working with, that is probably one of the most important things, because that can make a huge difference in your experience, whether it's in a large organization or a small one. Those are my 2 cents on that topic. Other thoughts, questions? We all set? Alex, do you have something? Yep.
So I'm wondering about how you feel like the job market has changed in the past few years, because you've probably seen different cohorts of interns come in, come out, or less of them come in, whatever it is. So right now, the state where things are at is there will be a new job posting on LinkedIn, and within 15 minutes, you have around 90 applicants. So have you been through this kind of situation? Has it changed? I'm curious about that.
yeah, it's like such an interesting thing to be like witnessing and also be in the middle of, because I definitely think that when I was like a sophomore in college, that was when people were like, not people, but the industry was booming, and they were like, this is where like tech is where it's at. Like there's going to be so many jobs and whatever. And then there was a wave of layoffs, and that was actually like kind of a stressful time for like interns, because usually like Microsoft has like this super high like rate of return like offers for interns, but my summer last year they like gave out this warning that like if you performed well but your team doesn't have the budget, like we're sorry, we can't give you, like there's no guarantees essentially. And so you definitely like I've definitely seen it shift a little bit, and it's sad to see that it's also changed the morale of certain companies and how people feel there. So like, yeah, I think like in terms of the I don't do like analysis into like like jobs on the rise and like how many jobs there are gonna be. But you know, I saw the graphs of like people of someone that said the number of jobs for in tech is like declining right now. So it's like the competition is harsh, and there are people like the reality is that the competition is harsh, and there are people that are getting laid off. So that means that like the competition's also like crazy of like how many people there are that need jobs in tech. And so it's sad that it's the reality and that it is kind of competitive in that way right now, just because it's changed so much in the last 5 years. And Jeff, like feel free to put your 2 cents in too, but like this is like what I'm witnessing as like someone that was like in the market for a job like last summer, and like there weren't many for new grads, and like people that had internships weren't getting offers because funding was lower than normal. So like it is a very daunting time. So that's why I also like don't be super hard on yourself if like opportunities don't present to them like themselves that super easily in tech, just because it is like sort of brutal right now. But I mean, Jeff, also like give your 2 cents as well, because this is like just like from like what I see in the headlines of
Sure,
waves of things happening and stuff.
sure. I like to, I've been around the block a few times, right?
Mhm.
So I've seen a few things in cycles, and we're in a cycle in terms of 2000, that going into 2001, that was a cycle, down cycle. And the dot-com bust was kind of what was happening then. 2009, coming out of the financial crisis, ooh, that didn't feel good either. And then whether you're going into or coming out of the cycle around the pandemic, obviously it affected different industries in different ways. The initial impact, obviously, in the tech industry was the hiring up because of the anticipation of all of the great things that were going to be happening in the virtual world. So net, stuff's going to happen. And the only thing you can do, you can't keep it from happening. The only thing you can do is be prepared. And so back to this notion of quality. You're going to compete on quality. So again, it's not the number of applications, it's those that are targeted where you have created your best story for fitting that particular opportunity. So that's the challenge, and that takes time. I think the biggest positive variable, is for you to be talking to others. Keep in mind, and I think I've probably shared this with a few of you in the past, all else being equal, I'm going to go with a known quantity. So I'm going to have two candidates that are of equal credentials, but one is known to the organization. I'm going to pick the one that's known because I want to lower my risk of a bad hire. And so how do you become known? Well, Katie's given some examples. I go to conferences. I talk to people. I talk to people who are doing the things that I think I want to do. I talk to people inside organizations that I want to work inside. And the reason I'm doing that is twofold. One is to raise, the intel, get the intel to raise the quality of my application and how I talk about myself in the interview process. But I also want those people that I'm talking to be advocates for me inside the organization, whether that's through a formal referral process or they can perhaps help navigate you to decision makers in the hiring process. That's gold if you can do that. So that's why talking to people is an important thing. So that's what I'd say. You can't do anything about whatever the is happening out there in the market. But you can raise the quality of your applications, and that's how you win when you're competing. Okay,
That's a good
I think
mindset.
we've, what's that?
That's a good mindset to have.
I think so.
Yeah.
Okay, we're past 8 o'clock. I want to thank you all for joining, and Katie, thanks very much for sharing your insights. And I'm sure you're open to students reaching out to you to have further conversations with you.
Mhm. Yeah. If
Oh,
you
yeah.
want, if you
Oh,
want, sorry, you can find me on LinkedIn, just look up my name. Or if you want my email too, I can give it to Jeff. And if you reach out to Jeff, then Jeff could give it to you.
Or
I can just
in
say
the
it
group.
now.
No,
Drop
in
it.
on Mid to Mid in the technology career community group,
Yes.
you're in it, and
Yes,
so
I
they
am.
can reach out to you directly. Yeah, they
Okay,
don't
yeah.
need to go through me.
Okay.
Right. And similarly, I encourage the students to do that with other alums that are in the group. If you look at their profiles and you see either organizations they're working with or the role that they're in, reach out to them. That's why they're in the group. Okay. So you don't need to go through me to do that.
I forgot
All right.
that group
I
exists.
strongly encourage you to reach out to them because they might be able to help you get hired. I can't really do that since I'm not inside those organizations. Okay. So again, Katie, thanks very much. And, look forward to seeing you on campus sometime.
Yep. Same here.
All right. Take care, everybody.